crops for your market, literally. I mean, if you were to define that term, Market Gardner, it's exactly it.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is Nick. I'm with Bootstrap Farmer. Karl of Harris Natural Farms. Hey, Karl.
Hey, Nick.
So, we have a new podcast series coming out, and this is primarily focused on, well, it's not primary, it's pretty much focused on Market Gardner's exclusive. And so I wanted this to be a super long form, multiple episode deep dive on day-to-day market gardening from two perspectives. One, my own personal market garden experience, played and mated with all of the market gardens I visited over the last 6 years in all these different states and what I've seen. And then your perspective of doing it day in and day out for the last, God, what are we up to? 4 years?
4 years now, I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and I think we met at the tail end of year one.
Year one.
So we've got a lot of history together. There's a lot of history on you being on the Bootstrap Farmer podcast. So there's tons of background stuff from there. But for this particular series, we're going to start at absolute zero. And on this episode, we're going to talk about what a market gardener actually is. And I think it's helpful to set up those parameters, right? Like, what exactly are we talking about? And I think if we look at what goes on day-to-day media-wise, things that are out there that are going to come across as people's news feed, there's either industrial ag, farms, or then there's the farm-to-table movement. There's the farmer's market movement. Occasionally, some talk about a chef's, desire to buy local. But I don't think that people like you, your story has truly been told on a big scale. There's a lot of farm marketing podcasts out there, but I think taking very, very specific niche questions and hammering down on those solely based off of our experience and what we've seen, heard, done ourselves is something to be a little be a little interesting.
Sounds exciting, man.
So if you were to explain, and I used to get this a lot, especially when I first came to Bootstrap, what do you do for a living? And you're going to tell a complete stranger what a market farmer actually is. How would you begin to describe that? Some
of it honestly depends on the audience. So like around here in these parts, we're kind of deep South culture. Truck farmer is like one of the first things that people come to mind. That's what they associate that we're with, because that's the nearest thing that they can relate what we're doing. Truck farmer was back in the day, or in their time at least, people would bring a load of watermelons or sweet corn to the market and they would, sell at a spot. It wasn't a farmer bringing, their crop to the feed mill. Right. And so that's, one avenue for a, certain audience. But another avenue or another perspective or description is like a micro farm. Like, we are very intense, about our farm. And so we have to explain it using multiple words. And often we get people that come out and they're just like, they've never seen this before. And, jaws drop and it's like, this is incredible. This is neat. And they have tons of questions just because it's so unique, at least in this area. Right.
I've kind of been getting onto myself over the last year, because I find I'll go to a new farm, go visit somebody, and unfortunately, it's not entirely exciting to me anymore, because I've just seen so much, and I don't like being in that place, right? Because every farm I go to is so unique. The people are so animated with life and everything that they have going on, different stories. I mean, it's just, it is exciting. I never want to lose the fact that every place I go to is a special place, because very, very good work is going on anywhere I go. And so I always think about, if it's interesting to me, how interesting is that going to be for somebody that is learning about it for the first time or interested in it. And that's kind of my touch point for whenever I go, is like, okay, here's the story that we're going to tell, or here's the thing that we're going to highlight on a farm. But I know for a fact you've been out in the field before, and it's everything you've wanted to be, and it's been your goal. Yeah. And it's so easy to take for granted.
Yeah, it is. And I think, just again, kind of backing up a little bit, but to put some parameters around like a market gardener, I mean, the scale size, right? Like, you're never going to hear a market gardener that's 100 acres.
No.
You know, it really is this idea of almost paradise garden mindset, right? That is actually a business. I don't know if that translates well in the mind of imaginary, but or imagination. But it's really a couple acres, maybe even. I mean, some people
a whole lot less.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many people we go to, and it's what I think a lot of people would consider a very large home garden.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's grown at such a scale.
Strategic.
Very strategic. Seasonal extension is employed. You know, they're starting seeds all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get to crops here in a minute, but there's such intent with the size limitations almost. It's like, look, we have this much. How much are we going to produce? It forces interplanting. It forces, you know, the proper mating of crops and companion crops, and you know, really thinking about the plate as a garden, that if we're going to take this to the market, is there something for everybody kind of thing. Yeah. That's the interesting thing about market gardening to me, is because of the sheer variety and volume of different crops you're bringing. I mean, like you specifically, you're bringing a ton of different stuff to each farmer's market.
And I mean, I did a lot of books, you know, reading books, JM and Curtis Stone. Some of those were my early mentors and still are, honestly. But, you know, when I first started, I wanted to do everything. You know, it didn't even matter. I think we've chatted about this before about, you know, crazy colored carrots. I think that you grew one time, right? It's like, but the reality is you've got to kind of start out with a base of maybe 10 to 12, and you know, you start to kind of expand on that. But really, it's and you get to personalize it too, though. You know, again, there's the term market is in there for a reason, because you have to know your market, and you're gardening, you're farming, and you're producing, you know, crops for your market. Literally, I mean, if you were to define that term, Market Gardner, it's exactly it. What can you grow in your garden that will sell at the market? I mean, if that's not a Webster dictionary translate or description, but definition, but that's essentially what it is.
And I like how you started off with the truck farm, which was about a year or so ago that we put out something. It was the history of farmers markets on the Bootstrap Farmer main page. And it was Amanda Van Hooser talking about the Dallas farmers market in particular, but really dialing in how farmers markets came to be as we know them today. And it started with the truck farmers, which these little tiny crops were grown on the side in between cycles of much larger farms, just to have some type of income coming in. They're going to farm anyway. It's a fantastic video, but deriving farmers markets and a market gardener, I'm specifically growing these crops to take to the market, to make food, or to make an income through selling of local food. I mean, that's it. Yeah. And so size, it to some degree is a little irrelevant, but I think it's somebody growing something for market to sell that doesn't have all this crazy expense that a traditional farmer is going to have. It's using what you have. It's adapting to your market. It's really serving the immediate neighborhood and the immediate community that you're dealing with, knowing that you don't have to serve all of them. Like, you're not responsible for the whole town, but you're responsible to your clients and your regulars, so to speak.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
You came to Paris, had 0 customers. Now you're one of the cornerstones of the market right now after 4 years, 5 years, whatever. It's the mush of time that we have. But each one of those is hard fought, one-on-one, very relationship building. It's so much more than just the food itself. Yeah. And that's something that they don't teach in the books.
Yeah, I would agree. And Kathy and I, we've chatted about this a few times. I think, you know, there's so many things that go into being able to market your garden, if we want to kind of continue on that that concept. In that personal relationship aspect is part of that market strategy, you know, and it's not like we're being fake or anything, but the point is that your customers start to know you, they start to trust you, they know you, they expect you to be there every week. And it's a huge part of selling that. You know?
And season after season, you're not growing for question marks anymore. You're growing for this person specifically, and you're growing for that person specifically. Yeah. Hey, these didn't sell, but everybody else bought this particular variety. So it starts to put a name and a face to every seed that you plant. It's no longer just, I hope this sells, but a very intentional planting for individual people. And that's the kind of power I think that so many people are drawn to market farming to, because if you go to the grocery store, you don't know who the hell grew this stuff. If you go to a restaurant, despite the fact that so many folks right now are, hey, we're a farm-to-table restaurant, but people in the industry, like, if you're not a farm-to-table restaurant, we see right through it kind of thing. Yeah. And so selling to restaurants is very much a part of market farming. It's a part of the diversification stream. But again, you're growing crops for that chef, just like you're growing crops to somebody coming up to the farmer's market. It's a very personal relationship on that side of things too.
It's almost like they're buying from you vicariously as if it's their garden, right? It's like, hey, we want to be able to grow this. You're doing the stuff that we would want to do, the same practices, and so we can see through you to exactly how the crops are being raised. And it's almost like it's, their garden in an aspect, but we're their gardeners.
And the chefs that we know that do it right and that highlight the farmers versus sometimes a chef will buy from a local purveyor, but not use that co-opportunity to go, look, we are doing what we say we're going to do. We are the kind of chef and we are the kind of restaurant that people are seeking out because of these things. It's not just another line item on an invoice. Right. We get how personal this is. Like a chef should see a farmer the way the chef sees their own dishes going out in which they're responsible for. Just like I know a lot of farmers, I mean, I remember early on, how critical you were of each little thing that went out. And over time, it's not that the quality has diminished, but I think all market farmers after year 3, 4 start to accept that not everything's going to be perfect. And that's part of the joy and the charm of local food.
And some of that, even the imperfections, if I were to pick up a little bit on that, is almost like character. Like it's evident that it's grown locally, that it's not, it's not absolutely perfect. Like to your point, we would not sell a collard green with a hole in it, from a worm or something that got it. And now it's like people, when they buy that, they don't, people aren't looking for perfection from us, from that. They know when they see that, it's almost like, a beauty wart, a Marilyn Monroe mark, if you will, on some of our produce, because that it's an indication it was grown locally. There's a story behind that. They're fighting battles with critters and like there's something beautiful about it. I'm not saying like we're bringing holy, produce to there, but imperfections to a minor extent are almost warranted. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And here's the flip side of that is you're allowed by the local consumers to have a certain amount of imperfections. But I think where things get missed and a lot of market farmers who may seem to be struggling, it's not that the produce is bad or that there's an issue with that, but there's other imperfections that lie within the administration of the business, with the marketing of the business, with the presentation at the market that drives people away.
Yeah.
So if we want to talk about who's coming to the market, the farmer's market in particular, and not just here, but everywhere else I go, it's people that really care about what they eat. That may be from a quality perspective, it could be from a nutrition perspective. They want to know where the food comes from. But by and large, these people do know how to cook, and they are cooking at home. And that's the clear dividing line between somebody that's shopping at the grocery store. This is just another chore. This is dropping kids off at soccer. I got to cook tonight. Versus people that go to the market, they're like thinking all the time about what they're going to cook. This is a big deal. Every single meal is their love language to their family and to themselves. And so while the imperfections are okay from the produce side, because they know you, they know what you're about, they know, hey, this is no spray, this is that, showing up to the market late, coming every other time, having a disheveled stand, having to get onto your kids. I mean, like all these things start to erode that relationship over time. And we're going to get into farmers markets having to wear so many hats, but almost the complacency of, I'm going to let these things slide because this is part of the farm charm. And some people just don't like that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I do want to like specifically dial down into is like the food direct to consumer is almost the byproduct of the relationship. And how can we put our best foot forward, not only for our customers, but for the other farmers around us who, if somebody's going to come to the farmer's market to visit you, but they have a bad experience with a neighboring vendor, that relationship, even though it's not your fault, is going to dwindle a little bit because they don't want to have to deal with it.
Yeah. The audience also is, it's very experiential, like the foodies, the people that are really committed, like you're saying, that are looking for, that are very aware of what they're cooking and, in this mindset of wanting to buy local, buy, where their produce is coming from. It's also another big part of that is the experience of it. Like they're excited to know. I would say probably 20% of our customers every week are looking for something new. What do they have in season this week? Like it's almost an excitement that they're coming to the market expectation, with the expectation of what do they have this week? They get their staples, right? The lettuces, microgreens, whatever we have. But then if there's something new, quite often they're asking, what's new? What do you have this week? Especially as the months are turning,
Right.
Like we went from summer into fall, everybody gets super excited about, winter squash is coming in, and now it's like for us, it's almost like, we enlarge their menu options, right? It's like, oh, I've been cooking the same thing all summer.
Everybody gets in a rut.
Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, market, things are changing. Paris Natural Farms has this at the market. And so now they get to come home with, winter squashes and sweet potatoes and things like that to kind of bring home and to have share that experience then with their family, even though that the extended family doesn't really know the full story of it, but they get to enjoy it and get to, obviously probably hear some stories, sitting around the table at what they got, where they got it, maybe even a story behind it, right?
And what a crazy thing is it to be a big commodity farmer or any vegetable, right? Turnips, tomatoes, lettuce, all the things that people associate with a market farmer are grown en masse, right? Just think about those farmers that, probably never get in the field, the farm owner themselves. Probably haven't picked anything in years and years, right. Haven't got to experience the seasons change like we do. Like you notice when the buds are coming out, you notice when it's a little bit colder day over day. You start to notice these things real acutely. Same thing with the audience. Like you can almost tell, like you said, the excitement or sometimes the disappointment or sometimes the confusion. And that could be, how much did this cost? Like, how much is this a pound or whatever the case may be versus what is this new squash, and being able to tell that story because you selected it for a time just like that.
Another, I think, delineation of Market Gardeners is that, coming from, I don't want to say a big ag because our farm growing up was not big. We were, dirt floor poor. And I mean that to the literal extent, but it was very seasonal. Like we farmed for one season. You put the plow on the ground in April and you were harvesting in September, October, and that was it, and then you had 4 or 5 months off and you did other things on the farm. But in market gardening, like it doesn't really stop, it's literally a year round thing. Now there are market gardeners that are, probably that don't have quite the advantage that we have down here, but still everybody is extending, as you said earlier, the seasons with low tunnels, high tunnels, greenhouses, and so it's a completely different mindset from that perspective, right? Where you are, the throttle, you never let off the gas. I mean, you're either working on the current season or else you're, planning and preparing for the next season. And, like you said, every 2 weeks, we're putting seeds in trays. We're starting new seeds, whether that's for the current season or the upcoming season. Like there's never a time that we're not planting seeds. And that I think is a huge delineation from, a farmer to a market gardener, right?
So let me ask you this. When you first got the idea that this is something you wanted to do, And I know that you in particular spent months and months researching, reading, preparing. I mean, you guys moved from an urban area to out in the middle of nowhere kind of thing and started, I mean,
Scratch isn't even the right word.
yeah, I mean, when we have an episode coming up about, purchasing land and things like that, I really want to get into, and I'm so thankful that we have footage from when we first met
Day
till
one.
now. It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
I guess where I'm going with this is, in your head, you had an idea that you wanted to become a market gardener. And maybe it didn't have a definition at that point. There's no way it had a size or anything like that. But if you could travel back in time and say, hey, I know you're thinking about this. This is what you think it is now versus what it actually is. Any idea what you would say to yourself?
Oh my goodness. I would get a bigger seatbelt. I mean, it really is, it's an awesome ride, right? So I don't.
It's not something you can prepare for.
No, you can. You've got to be committed. I mean, there's a certain mentality you've got to have. I mean, somebody who's going to go from one career into this without having the experience, you've got to be a kind of a go-getter. I mean, you can't be a guy who just sits and loves to play, electronics all day or games. And you've got to be kind of a committed personality. I think if this has been your whole career, it's probably going to be a natural progression, and you're going to be a little more systematic about it. But for me, it was jump right in. Let's start figuring this thing out. Had I had the experience, that would be like, if I could start over, I would be able to shave off, thousands of dollars of mistakes. Granted, I went
minimum.
Yeah, minimum. But at the same time, those are all memory marks. I mean, I can seriously stand anywhere on my land and remember all the trees that were there. And my kids can share that same memory. And so there's so much I think that I would redo, but I don't know that I would redo anything because of how beautiful, even through all the pain that we went through, and literally pain, chiggers, I mean, dealing with all the stuff that we went through.
Ants.
Fire ants, chiggers, thorns from our honey locusts.
Back problems.
Yeah, back problems. Yeah, just everything that
And in what moment did you ever, on a spreadsheet, put down, hey, I'll be out 6 weeks for a back issue?
Yeah.
How much is that going to cost?
Right. Yeah. You just can't. But, I mean, again, you're not going to be able to calculate that. There's something about the human nature, right? You get a hold of a vision and you start running with it, and you see the vision and it looks plain as day. It's easy in your mind, right? And then you get into the thick of it, and it's challenging. I mean, there's no other way around it. But until you start realizing like the enjoyment is in that journey, it's just always going to be a struggle until you can really realize, like, I need to appreciate this, because it's like, it's literally your story you're building, and without that, it's just another farm, I think.
Did you ever have a goalpost in mind where you thought, hey, if X, Y, or Z if we can make X amount at the market, everything's going to be different. If we could just like, and it never comes to fruition that any one thing is a catalyst that changes everything.
Right. It's exactly right. I mean, our first day at the market was like $25, and I remember saying, oh, if we could just do $300 a day at the market, and so, but that's just a moving target, because it keeps moving because you keep growing and your vision keeps expanding. The biggest thing for me was probably about a year and a half, maybe 2 years into it. And everybody probably goes through this. You start realizing your niche, what it is that you're set out to do, because again, you've got this vision in your mind, and I guarantee if you're just starting out, whatever you're thinking, it's likely a delusion, because it's gonna take so many windy, some beautiful, some horrific roads right along the way, and to get to where you're going, right? And at some point, you'll probably have the same experience that we had. So it's probably about 2 years into this that I got the full vision of kind of what it is we're set out to do. And I wrote it on paper, drew it out on everything. And that's been now the vision that I've been chasing, So to say it differently, I had a vision. This is what I think we're going to do, but it was really uneducated, no experience what I was doing. But then once, my feet got wet and we were, headlong into this thing, well invested, I got this vision for what it is we're doing and our model. It was so clear. I mean, and that's what I've been chasing after. And every season, I mean, I look forward to the next, year of planting, because I know that like this year even, we still have tomatoes in the ground. We've never had tomatoes grown in December, and that's always been the goal, is to literally have tomatoes grown up until we're ready to start the next year's seed. And so it's like, this is our first year. I feel like we've kind of, I don't want to say we've arrived, because we'll never probably fully arrive.
I mean, to be honest, you had this whole plan this spring to have tomatoes at the first day of market, and look what happened.
Yeah, we did it. So this is like our first year that we've kind of, because every year I've said, I'm going to do this, and we're going to have it for this long, and we're going to have tomatoes on market, and we're going to have them until the end of the year. And we've never done that. And this is our first year into this, and we're at the end of year 3 or 4, whatever it is, 4, I think. And so it's pretty incredible. You get that, but it's still like we're still miles away from fulfilling that full vision. But we're at a place where you can start enjoying some wins. The losses are less and the wins are a little more. And that's a good place to be, because the first year is just like,
you almost can't have that without getting your teeth kicked in for a couple
you have
of years.
to. You absolutely have to. Anybody who can just do that, one, won't appreciate it, and they may not last right through the whole duration of it. Now, I'll say that, going back to what I said a moment ago, if you've come from this, if you've done an internship at a big farm or something like this, you've been working with JM, or, had an opportunity to work at a farm like ours as an intern or just as a worker, that's a different experience. They're going to have a completely different track and mindset. But I think most people get into market gardening are people like us, where it's like you're in a career. You've either had a passion or you garden or something. You're like, I want a career change. I want to do something different. I want to make an impact in our world. I want to whatever your reasoning is to get into this field that you don't have experience in. That's going to kind of drive you a little differently than from somebody who's approaching this from a very an internship mindset. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I wanted to cover this in this episode, in that there's all these separate reasons people get into market gardening. And is it ecological driven? Is it a sustainability issue? Do they want zero plastic? They want zero insecticides?
Yeah.
All these things. Plus, we also have to make a living from this. Plus, we also have to sacrifice. One of us is probably not going to have a career anymore, except for this. Yeah. The other one, you're probably going to have to continue to work your tail off as I'm here on the farm. There's all these other sacrifices that all come into play, and that this is not a black and white business. And that's the one main thing I want to take away from this episode, is that if you're thinking about market gardening, you're not going to work for somebody. You're not going to make a widget. You're going to make a bunch of things that are going to get sold, but you're doing that for your own personal reasons and for your own personal fulfillment. And you're just hoping to hell that you're finding somebody that appreciates just a little part of it, because they're going to buy for different reasons. And I want to be super clear on that. Your customers are not going to buy because you're no-till.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
It may be a part of it,
yeah,
but they're buying from you because you're showing up, you're dependable, and you're growing anything great that they actively want to get.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Ideologies, I think, is a huge part of this. And you'll see that, throughout market gardening. You've got people that are just, define till, or define no-till rather, is cultivating, even with a wire hoe considered cultivating. You're disturbing the soil. So there's so many layers of ideologies that can go into market gardening. And so I don't think that the customers really ever get involved and understand that. There's the biggest question we ask or get asked is, what have we used any chemicals on it, really? And that's it.
And often not, do you feel that people that say, are you using chemicals? Do they even know what they're asking?
Right. No, and they don't.
They've been programmed to ask questions, which is great.
Yeah. They just know that they've read or seen, and it's true, right? Like strawberries are like the number one. They've got so much pesticides on, like, that's the number one, or the highest content of pesticides on produce is strawberries, right? And so people are aware of this stuff, and I think it's good, because if we don't grow apples, so we have to buy. So we buy organic apples, but even that term is tainted. We still will use dish soap on our apples.
It's like the worst thing, right? Is to live in the world that we know, and then to go eat, to go to the grocery store, to have to stop and get anything because we know.
Right.
It's almost like you wish you could almost forget because it makes you question everything that you buy.
Yeah. It irks me. I mean, like it literally in my stomach, I get knots when I see and we have 4 kids. And so various sporting activities or something, right? Everybody has to bring a snack and somebody always brings a bag of apples and all the kids will just run up and grab an apple and start eating it out of the bag. And I'm just like, and my kids know, I've got a passion for this. I'm not dissing it. I get it. We've got a large population that we have to feed. And that's just the world that we live in. But it still bothers me that my own kids will just run up and grab an apple out of a bag and not realize, what is on that thing.
Run me up and down a soccer field, see how quick I eat it, or whatever. But look, that goes back to what I was saying earlier is like everything people are doing is a chore, including buying the food, cooking the food, eating, doing the dishes. It all comes back to, it's another thing that everybody's so busy and it's a checklist. So it's one thing to be hyper aware of you being a market farmer and everything you have to do. But the whole other side of the equation is just so intimately knowing the people buying from you.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that gets glossed over in the planning and the prepping and the, hey, I want to start a Market Gardner. What should I get? All this stuff that tends to get swept under the rug. And I see it time and time again. It's like my whole reason for being involved in this industry is having farmers understand who they're selling to and why. I'd like to basically talk a little bit about your background, why you're sitting here with us, why people should care about what we have to say to some degree, because this is a new podcast that we're starting a series. And so just assuming that nobody has ever heard of Karl Binger or watched any of the previous, who knows how many videos, give us the rundown of where you started, where we're at in your farm life.
I said earlier, but I was raised actually in central Minnesota on a conventional farm. That's probably the best way to say it. And swore I'd never farm in my life again. It was just a horrible experience as a child, right? And I moved to Dallas in my teens and got married, had kids, and then about 6 years ago, we bought some land in Paris, Texas, while we were living in Fort Worth. Actually, it's probably been 7 or 8 years now. When we bought the land, it was just raw, all completely wooded. Not a driveway on the land, not a building on the land, apart from an old shed that had, trees grown over.
Just recently kind of found.
Yeah, nobody on our road knew that there was a barn on that property, and we didn't buy it, to farm. We bought it just as an investment, a recreation, hunting, camping, investment type thing. Just 10-acre parcel or 12-acre parcel it was. And since we bought another 5 acres that joined to that. In 2019, we made the decision or 2018, we made the decision to, we're going to buy a shed to house type thing. And we ended up running into a double wide. And we bought that, secured that, and cleared out a driveway, moved that on the property and started renovating that for a year. And then in 2019, we made the huge plunge to get out of the cities and move out to our land. It was right at the beginning of COVID. Not again. Farming was, prior to that, we were in Fort Worth living on a 3rd acre, very nice neighborhood.
Very North Texas.
Yeah. North Fort Worth, just wonderful place, right? I mean, I'm not a city guy, but if I had to live in the cities, I would go back there.
Dude, I cannot. I mean, I've been around your whole. Yeah. I've been around your family for years now. I can't imagine Kathy living in the city.
Yeah, we were known as the hillbillies, and because we had the smallest house on the neighborhood. It was a pretty nice neighborhood, and it was I'll tell you this. I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but within 6 months of us living there, we moved there from our previous 10-acre little hobby farm. I said we can't do this, and so we put our house on the market. And just because it was so uncomfortable. I mean, I had to sell my lawnmower, had to sell my skid loader, everything. And so we put our house up on the market and it just didn't sell. And we just were like, let's just ride this out for a while. And then when we went to leave, even though we had our house up here, all debt, almost essentially debt free, or it would have been after we sold the house. We had sold our house and we went and put an offer on a house in Weatherford, which is just west of Fort Worth. And because I just got cold feet, I'm like, I can't do it. I mean, and it was like a 3-acre parcel. And I thought we'll just kind of, have a little hobby farm and chickens and whatnot. And that sale fell through. And so we really didn't have a choice because we were, we sold our house. We were committed to, obviously we had to leave and all plans were in motion already. And so that kind of forced us to move out to, our double wide. And so I told Kathy, I was like, we should just start a YouTube channel called Riches to Rags, little rags to riches, right? Is kind of the typical saying. And so that was kind of our story, is like, we were just like, we kind of had a really decent house in Fort Worth and now we moved out to this old dilapidated double wide that we were renovating and literally no yard. It was just, I remember the first major rainstorm we had, it was just a mud pit. I mean, we had water that would cover your ankles and I was so devastated. I'm like, I want to go back. I mean, it was like, I was literally just defeated on day one, pretty much since we moved out there. But prior to that, we had been experimenting with gardening. We had done as much as we could in our little Fort Worth backyard. I'd built up some raised beds and started watching a lot of YouTube channels on homesteading and gardening and all these things. And so I had developed a passion for that. And I took over her dining room. I mean, I think our neighbors thought we were growing weed because our dining room, we had this huge
bay window.
Thank you. And our neighbors had a 2-story house right next to us and they could just see into and it was just lit up. And it was just all our plants. That's where we started all our plants. And we started getting into microgreens and we started selling plants out of the house, and then I moved it into the garage and I had lights kind of like what you have here in the studio.
Like all the rest of the kids had a lemonade stand and you're selling starts out of the front door.
Yeah. So we were raising eyebrows there and my wife was very patient with me. And so she knew that, a bug was getting in me. And so that's kind of where it all started, literally germinated, if you will, pun intended there. And
so as this episode is defining this whole podcast is going to be you and I discussing our experience, telling our stories, things we've seen. And as we're defining what a market gardener is, you've brought up 2 terms, hobby farmer and homesteading, which are not what we're covering in market gardening. So if you had to define what a hobby farm is in contrast with a market garden and what a market garden in contrast to a homestead is, because you do dabble a little bit in those, what I would consider different categories. Other than the selling of it, is there much of a difference?
I think so, because we still have a hobby farm, right? We still have 2 goats and a donkey.
Right.
We have these other things that don't provide value apart from they bring joy, to our kids and my wife. I think that's a hobby farm. And in our previous farm, that's all we had. We had a couple horses. My dad would have orphan sheep, and so we'd bottle feed them. We'd have a couple of his calves, and it was just things that were not necessarily there meant to create revenue, just more pleasure to say, to keep you plugged in with nature and agriculture. We had a garden that was a typical, maybe
for you and your family.
Yeah, just for us. And maybe enough zucchini, of course, zucchinis, if somebody left their window down, you'd go drop a zucchini or squash in their window, right? Because you didn't sell it, you just gave it away type thing. I think that's what I, classify as like a hobby farm. But then the homesteading mindset came as, again, watching videos, researching, reading books, and then just getting into it, like starting selling plants, it was like, oh, it's additional revenue. I'm also thinking about, hey, I've been in this IT career for so long, how can I start doing what I'm really loving, which is farming, or what I thought was farming at that time. How can I turn this into a revenue generating system? And so that's where it kind of shifted from homestead into market gardening. And I didn't really know what that term meant, honestly, at that time. It wasn't probably till I started reading some books like from Curtis Stone and JM. JM was a really big, that book, his Market Gardner book, was an eye opener for me. I was like, oh, I get it. So I can actually do this, multiply what I'm doing, because I was doing intensive gardening, but do that on a larger footprint. And that's a market gardener.
And I think that's one theme that we're going to see throughout this series is scaling what you currently have for more and more market opportunities. Back to the homesteading, I feel like you and your family live a pretty typical homesteading values-based life on the farm. There's a lot of cooking. There's a lot of fellowship. There's a lot of the way you raise your kids. And I don't want to dive too down into the personal stuff, but I think it's an example of you can do different disciplines. You can embrace other things in gardening that don't always have to be money driven because it brings such value to you. If we're going to wind back a little bit more, all that interlapping that we talked about, there's the reason that you farm and there's the reason that you believe in the things that you do, and you just happen to make money through the market gardening. Just because you're a market gardener doesn't mean that you have to not do the other things that bring you joy in life.
Yeah.
Including having your own personal garden.
Right.
That's just for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's where, and we still try to maintain that too, even though pretty much every raised bed that we have is considered for the farm, we're always looking forward to our own personal, like we have our own little garden area, right? But we still will go out to the commercial area, if you will, for our own, cooking purposes or for our own benefit. But we look forward to
R&D.
R&D, that's right, yeah.
You got to deduct this stuff, man.
But like in my mind, I know exactly what plot or what beds are going to be our personal garden. I'm looking forward to that. We're just not there yet, but it's fine. I understand where we're at and where we're going.
And part of this is your proximity to town. I mean, you're 15, sometimes 25 minutes, depending on what car you get behind on the way out to your place. But you do have to be self-reliant. You have to know how to fix things. You're not going to run to Home Depot every time something comes up. So if we're talking about all these different hats that you have to wear as a market gardener, I'm an analyst, I'm an accountant, I'm a marketer, I'm a grower, but you also have to be an electrician, a plumber, and a handyman, and a repair guy for your cars and all that stuff. This notion of, hey, we're going to make money off of the land. We're going to sell to our market, but we're also going to take the responsibility that we're not going to call a handyman every time something goes haywire.
Yeah. And that starts, I think there's a natural progression because you are all things to all people, at the beginning. And then now, after a few years, we're writing more checks now than I am, to do certain things, right? Like I just cannot keep up with, for example, like right now we're wiring up the Gothic that we got from y'all, and it's like I just cannot get to it, so I have to hire that out, to go actually bring electricity into that structure.
But that's a decision that you can make
right.
because you know your numbers, and hey, it's going to cost however much it's going to cost. But if I were to do this myself, how many times am I going to have to run to the store? This thing is going to take 5 times longer than what you thought. And it's probably at the end of the day going to cost in time, material, and the trips to the store. And then you're going to blow a fuse. But you at this point, because you're so busy and because you know your numbers, you know what expenses, and that's a big word, expenses, you're going to get to expense all that. That juice is worth the squeeze on that particular line item.
Yeah. And I really like to nerd out on all of that, honestly, I do. And I miss not being able to do all of that. I mean, there are some people that will just never let that go. Like they've got to do everything. I was that person. I remember the first time I had to have somebody come and do my own house repairs because I just couldn't do it. They had to put gutters on my house, and it was so awesome that I wrote a check for, I think it was $750. And he came down after 2 hours. Though the problem was he came down after 2 hours, and he asked for that check. And I told him, I was like, man, can you go back up there and just work for another hour, even if you just stay up there and come down with some sweat on your head? It'll make writing this check a little easier.
But you're paying for the expertise.
Yeah, I know. It was really satisfying to be able to write that check out, for that. And that was, I still remember that because it was one of the first checks I ever wrote for somebody to do for me because I'm such a DIYer. But now I rely on that, to augment my time. It's all a balance of time and money.
But it's also preventative. And my example for that is this summer, you had a crazy windstorm.
Yeah.
Tunnel survived, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But you did have a large tree fall on your house, take out your porch. I am very thankful that you were not the one crawling up on a ladder, jacking with a chainsaw, because the what if of you hurt your back again, you slip, you fight, like for you to be out even for 3 or 4 days, how much would that have cost?
Yeah.
Versus, hey, these guys do this every day. Let them do what they do.
Yeah. And they're professionals. I mean, that's just it. I mean, I think there's also an age thing in there too. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're 20 some years old and you're a DIYer, if you're me, at 20, listen to this, you're probably like, I ain't never letting anybody do that. I would do it myself, you wuss. Get up there and get it done. But
but you've done that. That's the thing. You do know how to, and you can, and you have. I remember this is the first year I've looked back at my career, which is a full. It's a normal person's full career in this industry, and to go, I'm about done building hoop houses, and usually I build 3 or 4 a year, and I have for the last few years. My own before Bootstrap, and then with Bootstrap, of course, that it significantly went up. But man, there comes a time where I don't want to mess with wiggle wire anymore. And it's not that it's hard, but it's like I've done it so much. It's time to pass that torch, so I can do other more important things, more meaningful things.
Yeah, but you've got to go earn the badge. You've got to go through that, and I mean, everybody needs to do that. I mean, unless you're some large investor, if somebody's investing in you to build a market garden, that's one thing. I have to always take into consideration context, audience, where everybody's at. I think most people that are listening to this are probably in very similar shoes to that I was in. They're in a career, likely not in market gardening, exploring, wanting to do this because they love the idea of farming and getting back to kind of their roots, and so you're going to have to learn it's hard knocks. You've got to be prepared for that. You've got to have your family on board, and you've got to be of the mindset of DIYers, get your hands dirty and start building this thing and stay focused. I was so afraid. I remember this analogy from day one, and I told the first guy I had come out and help, Eric, or his name was Eric, and I said, I just got to keep my foot on the throttle. It's like I feel like if I let off the throttle, my attention and my focus will be, taken away from this right now, and it's just it takes a lot of energy, to get up. It's just like a boat or a plane. I may have used this analogy before, but like an airplane or a boat getting up to plane, right? And a majority of all that energy that you spend is just right there trying to get up to plane. Once that boat gets up on top of the water, or once that plane gets up into, above 10,000 feet, right? It's a little freeing. And that's when you, I think, can find more freedom, and you've got awareness, of where you're at, what you're doing. You've got a better view, better perspective, and what you should be investing your time in. You don't need to be necessarily messing around with wiggle wire. Maybe you can have somebody come and do that for you. And you get some wisdom and perspective that you can't get without having gone through all of that hard energy and, painstaking process of getting up to plane, if you will.
No, for sure. And we talk to so many new and people are just getting into it, right? The vast majority of those that are making a very good go of it are coming from tech, medical, and finance. They know how to learn. They've been to school. They have degrees. They're in trades that a constant absorption of knowledge is required, and so they tend to fare very well into market gardening. Because they have a little bit more runway because their past life, could afford them that. There's no value that you can go, okay, yeah, you know how to learn, and you've read every single book and you've watched every single video out there. But to your point that you just made, unless you're out there on your property, everything that you've invested and promises you've made to people in your community on the line and your reputation on the line, you can't learn that by listening to us, by reading JM's book. Now you can shortcut a lot of stuff,
right?
Because we've seen a lot. JM has paved the way for a lot of learning opportunities, and that information is there and it's available. But until you apply that to all of the different variables that go into your personal equation, it's not going to happen.
That's right. I mean, determination will get you a lot further than probably anything else too, I would say. I mean, you could have those backgrounds, these people that are very educated and just looking for a career change, but you could also just be that person that's just got grit, like I'm a laborer in some trade and I just want to start doing this. And that's the nice thing about Market Garden is you can start where you're at. I mean, we started in Fort Worth. I was in IT. I didn't need the money, but I started, building soil blocks. I mean, that was literally, I had red Solo cups. I was selling plants out of red Solo cups, and it grows with you. And it's just a matter of finding that starting point. What's your vision? What's your determination? That'll take you and grit.
Well, dude, I have told you numerous times a year for years now that I've never seen anybody progress as quickly as you have. And your constant rebuttal has been, yeah, but something you're wanting more and you're wanting more and you're wanting more. And and I've always appreciated your determination for the next step as I would talk to you. And then maybe the next day, take a phone call from somebody or something would happen. I'd have to talk to a new farmer. Man, they would have given anything to been where you're at.
Yeah.
And we all do that, right? Like we all want to be,
mm-hmm.
we can point to anybody and go, that's my current North Star that I'm following. And I wish I could be that, or I wish, and I really wanted to stay true in this podcast that I don't want to talk about anything other than what we have personally experienced, seen, or done. Right. So I don't want to speculate on anything. And so I just want to encourage people I love what you said a minute ago about you can really start that from wherever you're at. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Like that's one of the things I love about this industry is you can start in your backyard. You can start. I mean, I know people are like on a patio or in a basement and they're doing something to start.
Yeah.
And you never know where it's going to lead. And so if we were going to wrap this up, I'm going to have to find a stopping point. But to define a market gardener, it's somebody selling something for profit. They can also live in other worlds. They could have a personal garden. They could have a hobby farm. They could maybe have a whole secondary farm that grows in an entirely different way. But at the end of the day, being aware that there's so many other things involved than just the growing. I think that's for me, the true definition of selling something for profit very intentionally for a market that you've carved out and have grown as your crops have grown.
I mean, what you just said is Bootstrap Farmer in of itself. I mean, if anybody knows the history of Bootstrap Farmer or even just the name itself, Bootstrap Farmer, I'm a Bootstrap Farmer. I mean, anybody who picks up this torch and starts heading down to the market gardening path or whatever it is, even a hobby farmer. I mean, if you are a bootstrap farmer, you're picking yourself by your bootstraps and getting your hands dirty and getting in on it.
And that doesn't have to mean that, hey, I have all the money in the world to go all out, or hey, I have $100. I want to start somewhere. That opportunity is there. Like you've got to that's the thing. So many people read, watch, but they never actually start. It's fascinating to me how many people will call up and say, hey, we're doing something wrong. And then you ask them about their experience. Well, I haven't started yet. Like it happens all the time. And it's like, man, just grow one tray of something, man, before you call up. Because they'll see that the growing, there's certain learning skills, but that's the easiest part of all of this is the growing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and you just got to try it. I mean, you're going to fail.
It's okay to make mistakes.
You've got to accept failure. I mean, it is. My wife has a hard time with failure. I mean, she thinks, I think I've said this before, she thinks if she fails one time, God has told her that she is not supposed to ever do that again. And I'm just like, to me, it's like, you're going to screw up the first couple of times. Like anytime we do a new crop, I'm like, we're going to fail. Like you've got to have that mentality of being able to give yourself that much grace. I think so many people give up way too early on farming, especially if you're a market gardener. Now there's a fine line, right? Again, context is a lot of things, but if you just jumped into this and you quit your job and you went all in this first year, expecting that you were going to make it, I mean, that's a tough, path to get on. But if you're in it for the long haul, like I know this is going to be tough. I've got the grit and determination. I'm going to start knowing that it's going to be a rough and rocky road, and you've got a alternative, revenue source. Your wife is working, your spouse is working. However that looks, I mean, grit and determination will get you there. I mean, you've got to figure this out unless you've got again, going back to what I said earlier, if you've had a multi-year or at least a few seasons under your belt of working as an internship, as an intern at another Market Garden or something, you've got to expect that and give yourself grace and stick to that determination.
Do you regret not interning or working at a farm
if I had to do it over again, I think I would. I just don't think I'd be able to do it with my schedule and just my personality. My personality is like, I got to get into it. I mean, I just got to figure it out. And I don't care about failing. I mean, it used to affect me. I used to get a personal rejection, but now I get like I get a little stomach, gut turn, like, oh, I failed. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, that's one time I've learned not to do it. I know that now the next time I'm going to do better, and probably the third time, I'll succeed. We've got a funny saying with all the, we were up to about 7 structures now on our property. And my buddy, Tony, he helped build one of the last structures we built. And so now we just have this saying, it's like, well, if you're going to build a greenhouse, you might as well do it 3 times. Because like, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to screw it up the first couple times. And by the third time, it's like, you've got it down, and the first time everything is so new. The second time there's some familiarity, you know what not to do, but yet you're still learning. The third time you're starting to, figure it out, and you've got all the wires in your brain are hooked up and things are jiving. It makes sense.
Well, that's, I talk a lot of mess about, I don't want to build another hoop house, but I know I will because I learned something on every single one that we do. Having somebody like Julian around, Julian answers our tech line, his ability to just make things better as he goes. Yeah. I may have built 30 hoop houses in my life, but building one with him is a totally different experience because he's looking at things from an outside industry, purely mechanical, efficient way.
Right.
And he's done wonders for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And perspectives. To that point, perspectives are invaluable. Whether that's a book, a friend, if you've got a Julian or a Tony or anybody, in your network, don't go into this by yourself. YouTube is an awesome channel. Bootstrap Farmer, your media out there for anybody who's getting into this, like.
But we can't be there with you.
No, but
we can't be there like behind you holding stuff for you. No. We can just give you the guidance.
And I don't think you want that either, because you want to be able to say, I did this, right? And I don't mean to say that from a pride standpoint, but if somebody just were to come out and do this all for you, I don't think you'd have the same satisfaction as if you went out and did the research, you stumbled, you got your, you kicked the tires a few times and you built this.
It's like, how great of a feeling is it the first time I like building a hoop house with somebody new that's never done it before, because it always comes that one moment where it comes the morning to put the plastic on, and the person who owns the house that we're helping build or whatever, that's always like a big nervous point for them, putting the plastic on the house.
Yeah.
And we put the plastic on the house, and it always winds up that they go in there for the first time after the plastic is up, even after a couple of minutes, and how much hotter it is. And almost the shock of how much hotter it is hits them. I love that. I love seeing that for people.
Yeah, it is. There is something, I don't know how you capture that or even explain that feeling when you walk in there.
And it's so different than, hey, I'm going to visit a farm. One's already up. I'm going to go in. Well, of course it's going to be hotter.
Yeah.
But that first realization that somebody has, that, man, you can't capture it. You just have to.
No, you got to experience that.
You have to experience it for the first time yourself to build it, and then the joy is watching like somebody else do it. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
It is. It really is fulfilling, man.
So you said something a minute ago that we're going to end each episode about 6 times, right? So like we do, but you talked about people trying stuff, failing. It's okay. I am under the camp that it's also okay to have a desire to do this, trial some stuff out, and maybe not from a failure perspective, but from a failure of, oh, wait a minute, my knees hurt all the time, or my back hurts all the time, and maybe this isn't the right thing for me. Like, it's okay to come to a point where it's okay if I just enjoy gardening. I don't have to make a living from this. And this life is not for everybody.
Mm-mm. Yeah. And again, that goes back to what I was saying before. There's so many different contexts, right? Listening through this. As we're talking, I'm trying to think through all the people that might listen to this. And I mean, it's okay just to be a hobby farmist, or just if that's such a thing, hobby farmist, a hobbyist farm, whatever. You can just enjoy, do what you want, niche. I mean, if it's just one tray, that's all you have, or a couple crops that you do. But the spectrum is whatever your imagination and your physical abilities and determination will allow you to. I told Kathy, I'm actually, I can see us in retirement, like not selling, but using every piece of all of our structures in our farm just in retirement, not even as selling produce, one for just pleasure of just sitting out there in an oasis of a greenhouse, again, in the middle of winter, enjoying the heat of like almost a tropical place,
Right.
And maybe another one that's just got chickens, maybe another one that's got, our seasonal crops for that one. And so, I mean, there's no end to where you can take this. And I don't think you can't go wrong. I mean, there's therapy just in hobby farming. I mean, that's what got me into it. I mean, I was so fulfilled. I was stuck in my corporate job, and all of a sudden I started working with live things, because I'm in IT. That was my primary occupation. And now I started working with organisms, living things, plants, put a seed in a medium, a soil base, putting water in there and watching this thing come to fruition, and to provide nutrition, and just, watching my kids cut microgreens off. I mean, like there's nothing else that has brought me probably more satisfaction in this life in terms of our family, and just having them be connected with nature, if you will.
Well, and I'm one of the best examples of you can still be in farming without being an actual farmer, right?
Absolutely.
We design hoop houses, we sell hoop houses, we make sure that every single one that goes out is going to a farm, knowing that we don't have to worry about that structure, right? Because we know there's so much flexibility in the build that whenever somebody does invest in it, like every time I see the hoop house go from paper to like, I don't know this person, but they bought this hoop house and now we see it out. I mean, that's incredibly fulfilling. But the ability to be at a company that's so dedicated to farmers, and I guess I still get to visit it, and I still get to eat from it and do all the fun stuff. There's that type of opportunity presented itself to me, which I couldn't have done this job without my previous life of farming myself.
Yeah, I'd like to hear maybe on one of the next episodes or something, just how you would go about this now, knowing from your farming, how you started, and now all the experience and the perspective that you had. I mean, like there's days I covet, when I hear where you're going to Jam, you're going to all these places, right? Like, how would Nick start over? I mean, it's a podcast.
I've been thinking about that notion a lot of if I were to go back to farming, what would I do? And I'd never go down the same road. Like I could, because it's so fun. Like all that stuff is so fun. The food part of it, it always goes back to added value, culinary based farming.
Mm-hmm.
But the how I'm going to farm is never the main drive. Right. It's what am I going to do with the stuff?
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. It's a good perspective.
Well, that was a lot to define what a market gardener is. On the next episode, we're going to talk about who can become a market farmer. Going to dive a little bit more into maybe some of the physical traits, maybe some things you can do to overcome some disability issues or things like that. We're going to talk about different age groups. That's a fun one for me to discuss because I've seen so many people try to get into it at later stages of life with sometimes great success and sometimes life lessons learned. And so we'll get into that, but I think we can walk away from this with a very short definition from a very long kicking about of different terms, in that, we are in this to serve the community by making a living in it and just kind of making lives better all the way across. We're going to dive into this and so much more in the next episode. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. See you on the next one.